morning, Professor Tatham. Thank you for participating in this mock session of the Jean Monnet Network on EU-China relations, and specifically about your work on the future of World Trade Organization and EU-China. First of all, to what extent did EU engagement with China help in the later succession to the World Trade Organization?
Well, good morning to you, and thank you very much for that question. It's very interesting to see how the evolution of the EU's relationship with China over the years has been very much, at least at the beginning, very much dependent on trade. And that's quite obvious because China at that particular time in the late 1980s, 1990s was suddenly expanding and its economy was growing exponentially, whereas everybody else sort of stood back and looked at it thinking, my goodness, it's a great opportunity for trade. And what happened was the European Union, which is very much based on the idea of having an international trade system which is governed by rules and is also multilateral in effect, realized that it would be in the best interests of international trade and the big trading partners like itself, the United States, Japan, and so forth, to actually bring China into either what we used to call GATT or what we now call the World Trade Organization, which started up and running in 1995. The whole focus of European Union trade policy in this respect, as it had been with Russia, is inspired in fact by the German notions prevalent since the early 1960s. They call that the Wandel durch Handel, and for those of you who do not speak German, that basically translates as change through trade. So the idea would be that there would be not only change in trading relations, but that would have a knock-on effect internally in the way in which the country was governed, and then externally in its relations, not just in trade, but in politics, security, and so forth. So the idea was that more trade would actually bring change within, let's say, China, and also in China's relationship and its dealings with the rest of the world. That's why the European Union took a different viewpoint, a different perspective to the United States during the negotiations for China's accession to the WTO. It acted as a bridge between the United States and the People's Republic of China in trying to bring these two sides together. Of course, it took a change in leadership in the United States, and it took quite a number of years, as you will recall. We're going on for at least more than a decade or more, nearly 2 decades before everything is finalized. So I think by that time it was becoming quite clear that if you didn't have China within the international trading system, within the World Trade Organization, there could be more problems of instability, that it wouldn't be following rules, that it wouldn't be part of problem solving through in this case, negotiations, consultations, arbitration, and an independent dispute resolution mechanism.
Thank you very much for your answer. Considering all the challenges in the People's Republic of China and European Union bilateral relations, why have the two partners managed to maintain their working relationship?
Well, that's a very important question because, of course, since China, it's now over 20 years since China has been in the WTO, we've seen a change in the geostrategic context within which we are working. We've seen this particularly more clearly with what happened with the supply chains during COVID, the impact now of the war in Ukraine on our relations with China politically and so forth. So we can see there's been quite a change. There are concerns, of course, about other areas. There are the recent panel which has been set up to deal with the European Union's problems with Chinese trade and Lithuania, and that is merely one indication, one particular case in which there is clearly a change of emphasis of feeling between the European Union and China, at least at the higher level. However, what has happened over the years, and that's been since the beginning of the 21st century, the European Union and China have created a network of high-level dialogues, working groups, and various other expert meetings, which form what we could call an ecosystem, a dense ecosystem of interchange, discussion, and deliberation, which is not something which is open to the public, but in which the main experts can actually discuss matters which affect each other at a technical level and also at a more higher level politically, without impinging upon the different positions each side has as regards international law, issues, internal matters, non-interference, sovereignty, and so forth. So basically, the European Union and China have developed a system of dialogue. And that is something, I think, which also, in a way, helps the Chinese and the Europeans to sit down in a much calmer atmosphere to discuss issues of common concern and try and find solutions to those problems. It also plays to the Confucian idea, the philosophical idea of actually trying to bring harmony between parties, trying to discuss matters between parties, trying to consult between parties, so that in fact a resolution to a problem may start to be seen as being too wide, but discussions and talks and building up trust and understanding actually allow for development of mutual respect. And this particular network, these particular dialogues have been much more resilient in the face of the geostrategic problems that we have, the difficulties that we have with the European Union, perhaps in some senses siding with the United States on issues with China. There are difficulties with the European Union itself with China, but this particular network, which is focused on trade, has been very, very important in keeping the discussions open over all these many years.
Finally, will the European Union and the People's Republic of China be able to collaborate on common projects in the future, including the reform of the World Trade Organization?
Well, that is a big question, and I understand it's something that's not going to go away. I think we can see that both the EU and China want to have a trading system, a world trading system that is actually governed by rules. They want to take the poison out of geostrategic issues. They want to put that away from their actual bilateral relations. They want to, in effect, they want to be able to discuss these matters together and to work within a common framework, because that's in their best interests. The Chinese and the Europeans, and I should imagine also American companies and Japanese companies and so forth, want to have stability in the international trade system. They don't want any big changes. But all sides, I think, recognize that the World Trade Organization was designed for the 1990s, and we're living in a different world now in the 2020s. And I think all sides, whether or not supported by the United States, are starting to move along to the idea of reform. For example, China or the People's Republic of China and the European Union have set up their own working group on WTO reform, in which they have some very common interests in pushing forward together. For example, changes in the way in which the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO actually works, the panels and the appellate body, the way in which certain aspects of deliberation within the committees and the councils of the WTO can actually bring forth the possibility of decisions. What we see at the moment, because of the lack of multilateral decision making, there's now formed these different groups dealing with a plurinational way forward, so that groups of countries, of WTO members that are interested, are now discussing things like e-commerce and trying to find common rules, which, because of we could say the failure of the Doha round to produce anything, has been a way forward, and this has produced results. In fact, this has been the Chinese approach to these negotiations all the way through, because China has sought to go for positive solutions more quickly in order to build up trust to be able to deal with the more difficult issues later on. And in this sense, the Chinese have had success. The agreement on fisheries subsidies, for instance, in which China and the EU, having already had a lot of experience dealing with fisheries issues between themselves within the EU context, used that experience to push forward support for the fisheries subsidies agreement, which was concluded last year. And there are so many other areas. E-commerce. The European Union and China already have experience working together on that in the EU framework, and now they're using that within what we call joint statement initiatives in the WTO, with a plurilateral way forward. Hopefully there may be some change there. However, having said that, plurilateralism, unfortunately, in a way, is a return to the old GATT of 1947, and that also has its problems. And also, in fact, these joint statement initiatives, recently the WTO has reminded members that while they can talk together, they can't make a decision plurilaterally within the context of the WTO. So there are rough seas ahead, what we're going to see. However, I can see that China and the European Union can push forward some of this agenda, while understanding differences remain about market economy status, developing country status, the issue of state-owned enterprises, industrial subsidies. All of these are particularly sensitive. But following the Chinese approach to negotiations, they seem to have already had success in the areas which differences were so small. And it looks like progression in the future will be able to address the more difficult issues on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you again for your participating in this project, and we hope to collaborate with you soon.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you.